Guys, welcome back to another episode of the CDP Growth Show. On today's episode, I'm joined by Matt, who is the current Director of Marketing at Loadsmart. Matt, how you doing?
Doing great, Joseph. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. No worries. Awesome. So Matt, before we kind of dive into the main part of the podcast, just give my audience like a really quick, 30-second rundown of, first of all, what Loadsmart is as a platform, and then who you guys serve.
Yeah, sure. So Loadsmart is a digital freight technology company. So we compete with the likes of Uber Freight, Convoy. So that space, so that sector of the transportation market. And really what we do is we use technology to help shippers like the Coca-Cola company, Kraft Heinz. So really kind of big brands move their freight across the country more efficiently. So that's kind of Loadsmart in a nutshell.
30,000. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. And when did you initially join the company?
I joined the company in October of 2018.
Okay. So just kind of over
a year and a half ago, thereabouts.
Year and a half, 18 months. Okay. Awesome. So something that I really like asking my guests as a kind of first intro question, just to kind of give the audience context for, how you've kind of got into this world of marketing and kind of your journey up until now. And it's, how did you get into this world of SaaS and kind of B2B? Have you always been in B2B? And
yeah. So it's kind of a funny story. And when I say it, they're like, "Oh man." So I'll start off. Nepotism's a great thing. I mean that sarcastically, but the short story is I grew up in a venture capital family.
Okay.
So
interesting.
Yeah. So my dad, it was right around the time of the bubble, but the short story is he founded a venture capital firm. That ended up getting to a pretty reasonable level of success. So that was kind of my life growing up. So naturally, when it came time to start looking for internships, working at my dad's firm, and then potentially looking at some of those portfolio companies as an internship, that's kind of how I got into it. So I was fortunate enough to be able to intern for Logman very early on in my marketing career, right? Managed to do a good enough job that they had me back part-time. And then once I graduated college, they made me an offer to join full-time. So, and ever since then, I've been in what I'd say SaaS, B2B marketing, different industries, everything from remote access, remote support to big data, predictive analytics, and now transportation. So, kind of fell into it, but I've been in kind of the startup in the B2B space since the very beginning of my career.
From the beginning, right? Okay. And what made you join Loadsmart? Like kind of Loadsmart. What was the incentive behind that?
Yeah, totally. So a bit of deja vu, to be honest. So I was at another startup about maybe 8 years ago that had a similar approach to solve this problem, specifically within transportation, but it just wasn't the right time. They were way too early to market, and shippers and all the partners that you'd potentially want to like build really tight integrated relationships with, just they weren't ready to kind of open up the walled garden and let companies like that one at the time with them. So that's actually fundamentally changed now, call it 8 years later. Shippers are very much, and I think it's also kind of like downward pressure. Consumers are getting increasingly, their expectations are increasingly oriented towards like, hey, I need my shipment 2 days from now, right? Like the next day effect. So I think shippers have become increasingly open to looking and integrating with technology solutions that enable them to do their jobs a little bit more efficiently and save money. That wasn't the case 8 years ago. So for me, when I look at Loadsmart, it was the right time in the market. And I think when you look at the market itself, there isn't one player that owns a huge percentage of the market. Even the largest broker has like a couple percent market share.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They're a multi-billion-dollar company. So if you think about it that way, it's like, okay, right time in the market, the industry-leading technology, and there's potential to become a really big company in the space without having to take a huge percentage of market share. You could be a really big company in this space, with 1 to 2%.
And have a tiny market share. Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. And I guess that brings us quite nicely onto the point of, with everything going on right now, everyone working from home. I know you mentioned kind of prior to this conversation that something that you're kind of personally very excited about is really capitalizing on the kind of brand opportunity, right? With things like virtual events and, webinars and just the whole world of virtual right now is, I think for me as well, is really, really interesting. So I'd be interested to hear kind of how you're going about that personally right now, and some of the things, some of the plans that you've kind of put in place to really help you guys capitalize.
Short stories. Yeah. Short stories. I don't have all the answers. I'd like to think I do. No.
Of course. Yeah.
So we were fortunate enough to make a really heavy push towards digital in Q1. So historically, Loadsmart's relied a lot on field. So events, conferences, field events, smaller, more intimate events, right?
Trade shows.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, for instance, doing like a swanky dinner where you get, 8 of your prospects, 2 of your customers in the same room and let them talk to each other. Like that's great. That's actually a great marketing strategy. The first story is like, field and event marketing is done for the next year. I think
It's not going to have the same scale.
Yeah. And when it comes back, it's not going to be at the same scale, right?
Yeah,
it's going
exactly.
to be 20 to 30% less attendees. At least that's my guess. So we were fortunate, like I said, to already be pushing kind of more heavily on whether you call a webinar or a virtual event. Like I think that's up for, a little bit of debate. We can talk about that. But we were already making this push, right? So we were actually really fortunate that as kind of COVID hit, we literally ran 3 webinars in Q1.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we were actually set up pretty well. What I think 2 things that are kind of interesting. I think one is that because of COVID, marketers are looking at not channels, but activities like webinars, right? And I think webinar is still a far cry from a virtual event, right? It's a virtual meeting.
Yeah.
Like a virtual
event.
Virtual
sales pitch. Yeah.
Exactly. So actually one company I think that's done a fantastic job at this is Alice. I don't know if you follow that. Yeah, but they did a fantastic job at actually kind of, really doing a virtual event versus just running a webinar. And I think people are still trying to figure that out, but I think webinars are a natural fit, to replace a virtual or replace a physical event.
Yeah.
But I think marketers all internally know there's still it's not a direct one-to-one replacement, and we're still trying to figure out how to make a physical event virtual.
And really how to, I think it's like you said, it's really creating that experience, right? It's a webinar in a lot of cases is just an SDR on a sales pitch, right? It's just it's them, trying to get people to sign up to a gated piece of content, right? And I think the difference with a virtual event is you're really trying to create that experience, right? And you're really trying to create that. And I think, like you said, that the people that can do that the quickest in whatever industry they're in are the ones who are really gonna win in that brand, from that brand.
Exactly. Sense. There's another company in our space specifically. So Alice is like a marketing company or a MarTech, I think.
Yeah.
Or corporate giving maybe. But in our space, there's a media company that's done a fantastic job, a company called Freightwaves. They've done a really good job. So they had live events scheduled to occur. And right now they literally made the shift inside of like a month to a virtual event, and they pulled it off. It's actually happening right now. So yeah, I think, some marketers are really focused on kind of solving this problem, and their early results, I think, look really interesting, kind of rethinking what a virtual event actually is. But we still have a ways to go. So that was kind of like one of my thoughts. And then the second thought I had, which isn't necessarily like tied to virtual events, but more tied to how you're kind of promoting that stuff.
Yeah.
I think LinkedIn represents a massive opportunity for marketers. Like duh, right? Surprise. LinkedIn's great for marketers. No, but I think there's kind of 2 opportunities on LinkedIn that not a lot of people have cracked yet.
Yeah.
And the ones who have already cracked it are benefiting from it. So the 2 opportunities I think on LinkedIn are one, native video, and especially sponsored native video is incredibly cheap. Like orders of magnitude cheaper. And I think the other thing that I think is happening right now is, sorry, I'm kind of like going all over the place.
Go ahead.
Right. But I think what's happening right now is the old model of marketing and also like how people viewed marketing traditionally, right, is I think changing. I think, a lot of, especially B2B, like I think for the past 10 years or so, people have viewed marketing as the lead machine, right? And the reality is, it's like, okay, how many leads came out this week? How many MQLs, right? It's just like
crazy.
Yeah, it's insane, right? And not only that, but if you think about kind of where the lead typically fits in the life cycle, right? Or like in terms of like a customer life cycle, like the point that they raise their hand and say they're interested in something is like 3 steps down the line, right? It all starts with awareness. And I think marketers are starting to focus, like actually
more
think
on the
about
awareness.
the actual, the actual journey, right? And I think native video specifically, like dovetails really well into that. And just to like paint a picture around that, like I could spend $200 to capture a lead, the traditional kind of marketing playbook or formula, right? On LinkedIn. It would be like a $200 cost per lead.
Yeah, ebook conversion.
Yeah, exactly. But, or I could spend, call it like pennies on the dollar to get that person to watch a sponsored video 8 times. You know what I'm saying? So like,
crazy,
if you think about it, it's like, don't get me wrong, there's like, tactics. You want to use the right kind of marketing tool for the right, problem or challenge.
Yeah.
But I think sponsored video and native video and kind of getting that content in front of the people you want to sell to before you even care about them becoming a lead, I think is a massive opportunity, because you can just saturate the zone and do it for pennies on the dollar. So I think that's like a massive opportunity. And then, oh, sorry, go ahead, man. I
don't worry. I was going to say, I think a lot of companies, they've kind of got that awareness piece the wrong way around, right? It's a lot of the time it's one singular piece of gated content, an ebook or a webinar that they get you to sign up for, right? And then it's so much awareness after that, but it's the wrong way around, right? It should be that, top of the funnel awareness that you said, native video, that is just ridiculously cheap right now. And I think it's crazy that companies are still not figuring this out. I'd say the amount of companies that are actually figuring this out is less than 10%. It's
easy.
It's completely crazy.
And I think, even after LinkedIn, and it's funny, like I like talking about this stuff, but then I'm also like, oh man, like I'm going to give away like, what I think the next opportunity should be. And there's like advantage to being there first, The other channel I think that's really interesting right now is YouTube.
Interesting. And do you mean more on the paid side or just the organic side?
On the paid side. Don't get me wrong, like great for content distribution, right? But like on the paid side, there's still a barrier to entry for YouTube, right? Like you need to be able to create a video ad. You need to actually have like compelling creative, and there's a barrier there for a lot of companies, especially early stage. But if you crack it, like it's a channel that's not super saturated for most industries.
And you can do some super creative things on YouTube, like the kind of competitor, keyword where you're literally paying pennies to get, people who are using your competitor's software to see your ad. And you can do some really super creative things on YouTube. So I agree with that. I mean, what channels for you guys in terms of, are you pushing a lot on LinkedIn, like video native right now? Are you guys?
Yeah. So we do, we've tested a bunch of different channels, and it really depends on the segments that we're trying to serve.
Yeah.
So on the carrier side, so for the trucking side, because we have 2 sides to our business, right? The shippers who give us freight.
Yes.
And then the truckers who move that freight for us. So we found Facebook to be a really great platform for the trucking side of it. Like a lot of that segment lives there for us, which is not super surprising. What we found is LinkedIn is really the channel for shipper acquisition, awareness and acquisition. So one of the things we operate off of a account-based marketing model, or sales and marketing model. So we know the accounts we want to get into. So what we do is when we have a killer piece of video content, we literally create matched audiences on LinkedIn. So literally the accounts and the contacts that we're actively trying to sell into, I can literally set aside, call it $200 and have everyone in that list watch that video like 5 times. So it's just an incredible, like native video on LinkedIn combined with ABM is just like magic recipe.
Yeah. I agree. I completely agree. And what for you guys? Because again, awareness is great, right? We know this. Like there's a huge opportunity right now to drive a huge amount of top of the funnel awareness insanely cheaply, right? It's the reality right now. But like how it is obviously still an important factor of, okay, what are you actually doing with that awareness, right? So I'd be interested to hear how how you're kind of, where you're sending them, the strategy from, when they kind of first come into the funnel, because there's so many things you can do now with looking at intent data and
we're still totally. So short story is we're still a little bit amateurish. We're not amateurish. We're just early, right?
Early,
Marketing and sales at Loadsmart's been in place for like a year and a half. Literally since I joined. So the short story is we're not looking at like intent data too much yet, but we're definitely aware of it. And also how intent data can be leveraged in so for instance, like demand base, I know like, I believe plugs and plays like with intent data. So you can kind of use it to help shape your ABM and your ad strategy. But what we do is, so one, we have kind of this constant stream of native video content and other content, but really a lot of it's native video that we're promoting against that matched account list and matched contact list. We actually have multiple levels of targeting there. So let me just explain that real quick, and then I'll talk about kind of how we follow up with that. So what we do in terms of our targeting is we upload the contact list, right? Like the exact people our salespeople are trying to unlock, create a matched audience off that. But then we also upload the account list, right? So the reality is like the match rate isn't going to be 100%. So what we do is we target the titles at that account as well.
So you're filtering it by just the, makes sense.
Like a Venn diagram, right? Like we have multiple ways of targeting that overlap to make sure we get great coverage. But then what we do is we actually follow that up with more LinkedIn ads, believe it or not. We use, so when it goes kind of transitions from awareness to like activation and acquisition, more so on the acquisition side, we use LinkedIn conversation ads quite extensively. And those are amazing. And that's another opportunity that I think a lot of
they've recently just released, haven't they? Kind of recently. They're quite recent.
I think maybe 2 months ago, something like that. But they are ridiculous. So just to paint a picture around that, when we started our LinkedIn advertising, I think we were looking at like a $300-ish cost per lead. We brought that down to $200, which is about industry standard, right? Nothing to necessarily brag about. But then when we started testing conversation ads, we actually brought that cost per lead down from $200 to $37.
That's completely crazy. That's using conversation ads?
Yeah, using conversation, which is insane. And not like, and it's not like one lead or two leads. We're talking like probably
across the board.
Like we've probably generated at this point 60 to 80 leads using conversation ads at $37 a pop.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean it's unreal, right? And what's cool is about those is you can actually send them from the rep that's been trying to unlock the account. So it's almost like
they
you
know them.
I mean, so like we leverage LinkedIn for awareness, we leverage it for acquisition. I mean, at the same time, our reps are trying, they're using the standard sales channels to try and unlock these guys as well. What we haven't had a ton of success with is the typical like request a demo like ad, right? Hey,
conversion based ads.
And to be honest, like with the segment we serve, I mean, we're trying to sell to the VP of transportation at like a Fortune 100 company, and the reality is that VP going to
be scrolling through LinkedIn?
Going to be scrolling through LinkedIn and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to request a demo. Like I got, like that.
It's not going to happen.
Bluebird. It will happen, but like you're not going to be able to build a repeatable, scalable lead gen model
system from that.
Agree. So anyhow, somehow we went from virtual events to LinkedIn. But like LinkedIn, I think for marketers is still a massive opportunity. But the one thing I would say, it will not always be this way, right? It's like as soon as one marketer figures out how to crack a channel, then everyone's
insanely competitive.
And it's happening real quick. So I think, by this time next year, I think the marketers will be paying a lot more to do the same things that I'm describing on LinkedIn that we're doing now. Just because I think, as soon as marketers become savvy with the platform and learn how to do these things, then costs go up.
I think in the general scheme of things, LinkedIn really is still a very early platform in terms of the advertising space and some of the things that I know they've just recently added stories. So I think LinkedIn as a kind of ad platform is still, even though it has been around for a few years now, I still think it's, for marketers, it's become a platform only really over the last 1-2 years that they've really started to heavily use. So I think as these new things do start coming on, it will become a very competitive environment very quickly, which means, you have to get good at it, and you have to be in them kind of early days to understand how it works. So yeah.
Exactly. And one other thing I was going to suggest, we're going to be taking a look at Reddit at some point.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but same thing, right? It's like looking at the platforms where your users are that aren't yet saturated and figuring out how to unlock them. I think that's the game.
Completely agree. And on the point of kind of, inbound strategies and LinkedIn and kind of how you guys, because it's great having all these strategies, right? But you've got to have tech that kind of glues this all together, right? Otherwise the machine doesn't really work. So I'd be really interested to hear how you guys have kind of structured that MarTech stack and some of the key softwares that you guys have put in place that have really aided the growth over the last 18 months.
Yeah, totally. So our stack's pretty simple for now. So
keep it simple.
So really, I think there's probably 3 core pieces, and then we surround that with some kind of like tangent tools. So we use Salesforce as our CRM, like everyone else. Why do we pick Salesforce? Because it integrates with everything. Everything's on the App Exchange. So it's just, if easy. You're serious, you're going to use it, HubSpot for marketing automation. I think, to be honest, I think marketing automation is entirely commoditized. I think there's not a huge difference between what you get with Marketo versus a HubSpot. And
there's even quite a few small platforms now that are starting to have very same offerings to HubSpot now.
Exactly. Like marketing automation's commoditized, right? So I think, and it has been for a while, but I think the reason why we picked HubSpot is just because I can go deep with HubSpot. I know how to create email templates, landing page templates. Yeah, it's simple. Best bang for your buck. SalesLoft, we use that for our sales engagement. Not all of our sales reps are on it yet. It's mostly just our account executives versus our account managers. But we use SalesLoft just because we thought it was there's really, I think, 2 choices there. It's
outreach,
maybe 3, but it's SalesLoft or outreach.
And what made you pick SalesLoft? Was it just a cheaper option, or?
No, to be honest, I think and this was more driven by our sales ops team, so I wasn't as plugged in with this decision, but I think they felt most comfortable with the SalesLoft UI and our reps being able to adopt it. They just thought it was simpler.
Yeah, I think on that point, I think it's quite a good point there, and that goes for any software that you're adding to the stack. It is that accountability piece, and how easy is this going to be to implement this with the entire team. I don't think a lot of people think about that point, and I always pick that up when people say that, because I think it can cause a lot of issues when you add a software too quickly without thinking about the ramifications of, is everyone going to be able to use this properly? Is the SDR team going to be able to use it properly? Yeah, exactly. Really kind of key point.
Yeah, but I'll also give them a shout out. I think their customer support is phenomenal. We've had a really good experience with SalesLoft, so shout out to them. Awesome. If they're listening, I doubt that. I doubt they're following me. But anyhow, so I think that's a great platform. The other 2 tools that we use pretty frequently are Calendly and we use Zapier just to connect stuff together. Yeah, we do a lot of alerts with Slack and stuff like that. So it gives our sales team a little bit of a jump if a lead comes in the door.
It's like gamification piece, right?
Yeah. So we use basically Zapier is the glue and duct tape holding together our marketing, parts of our marketing stack right now.
Yeah.
The one thing we did look at doing, but we didn't end up implementing yet, is Segment. It was on the books for this year. We think, for me, I think it's an incredibly important piece of a marketing stack, and I think you need to do it early. But yeah, that was kind of the one piece that we were looking at implementing for this year that just ended up didn't make it across the finish line due to budget.
I'm curious, obviously, on that kind of CDP kind of segment piece. Obviously, it's been a relatively new thing to the market over the last few years. I'd say it's been more of a kind of e-commerce thing prior to that, but I think we're seeing a lot of B2B SaaS companies starting to adopt CDP like platforms, and there's definitely a lot of mixed opinions, right, in SaaS about a CDP, and when do you implement it, how does it come in, So I'd be interested to hear just why, from your perspective, that you do think it's important from a data perspective, and just kind of gluing the stack all together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think the big challenge comes from the fact that, especially on the MarTech side, a lot of the times the vision's short term, right? And so the MarTech vision needs to align with what the rest of the marketing team plans on doing to hit their goals, right? Yeah. And unfortunately, I think there's a disconnect where people look at MarTech in the very short term, right? Like, what do we need in the next 3 months or 6 months versus, yeah. So you end up, and most people are like, hey, we don't need a segment right now, right? Or a CDP. So they end up continually kind of going down this road, right? And what ends up happening is you end up adding new tools. You end up needing to track new conversion points. Yeah. And there's a conversion point for every tool that you adopt, right? Yeah. So what ends up happening is like, before you realize it, like, and it doesn't take long. I mean, it could literally take like 6 months. Yeah. You've gone so far down the road of having kind of this different federated, like this federated pool of tools, and each one needs to be instrumented like on your website, right? Or integrated. And that's a freaking mess. So like, and the reality is like, if you in integrating each tool kind of one by one, right? Like, it also, you end up with discrepancies in data between tools, like conversions, like it happens all the time. So like, so think about it. Like, you want to be able to instrument the entire customer journey, and you want to have the right marketing nudges through different tools, whether that's at the awareness phase, activation, acquisition, revenue, whatever. But in order to do that, like, or the way a lot of people do that is they just integrate each tool one by one, right? And it's just, the tools don't talk to each other. They operate off of different data sets because conversion points are different. So segment, I think, or tools like Segment, right? Because there are people out there. I think it is like vitally important to put that in place early, and there's no reason not to, because the cost isn't, for most companies, if you're,
it's not insanely high.
Yeah, for most. If you implement it early enough, like, the costs are negligible.
Yeah, like, and I think it's also what it saves you from 6 months from now, from having to, I mean, that cost is insurmountable, right? Of adding all these softwares and then realizing that, data is just everywhere, right? And you've not got that unified kind of central point where everything is. So yeah, I think it's such an important piece that if more companies could put it in place from, near enough day one, it would save a lot of headaches 6 months from now.
Yeah, you want to build that unified view of your customer, and then you want marketing to be able to kind of like interact with that, prospect or customer across its entire journey. You need good data to do it. And the only way you do that, at least well, in my opinion, is through a CDP.
CDP. Makes sense. And so is this something that you guys are kind of looking to implement at a certain point, or is it just?
Yeah, I mean, it literally almost made it to this year's priorities. Like, I was actively working with engineering to implement it in Q1, but then just budget considerations and also timing considerations of like, it takes engineering time and I have to kind of barter for that, right? But it will be a priority for us again next year, because like already, like, I'm talking with our engineers and they know kind of what's coming, and it's like, do you guys want to continually be adding events to send events to Google Analytics? Like, do you want to continually be, it's just, it's a mess.
Completely.
So it'll probably come in place for us next year.
Makes sense. And again, I'd be on the point of, building stacks and what goes wrong and what doesn't go wrong. I'd be interested to hear just your perspective on how, particularly kind of early stage founders, early stage marketing teams, how they should really kind of go about, structuring that stack. And just some kind of general advice, on your part, in terms of some things that you should really avoid doing, right, in that kind of early phase.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talked about it a little bit, right? Which is like, you do not want to get to a tangled mess 6 months from now. And I think at the heart of everything that marketing wants to do, you need reliable data. And you need a clean picture, or as clean as you can get of that, of that prospect. And I think the challenge is when you're early stage, you have so many fires to fight that, making sure you have a good data layer in place for marketing, like, doesn't always meet the list of things you got to knock out. But the pain you will feel
Yeah.
And once you add scale on top, is just like, it's nuts. Like, take the time to identify all the different areas where your customers and your prospects interact with you. Could be your mobile apps, your website, etc. Make sure, and then and then connect those things, right? Like, I think the very first thing before you start rolling out marketing automation, before you start rolling out like ABM ad tools and all this other stuff, or even advertising to an extent, make sure you have the data right. Get the data right. And I think the way you do that is by spending, it doesn't need to be a ton of time, but literally spend a week or 2 weeks, identify all those different touch points where customers interact with you, and then use a platform like Segment. Doesn't need to be Segment. There's others out there to connect that data, because it's going to make your job and your ability to
100 times easier.
Yeah, 100 times easier. And like, as a marketer, right? Like, you're going to be asked to do things that touch those different parts of the customer lifecycle. Like, that's what you need to do as a marketer. And you can't get there without the right data. So solve the problem early, even though it doesn't seem like a fire. It will be a fire 6 to 8 months from now. And yeah, just do it now while you have the opportunity to do it, and you don't have the burden of scale.
Yeah. So get it done in the early days before getting to a stage where you've got to start adding softwares in and scale comes in, and it's just
then
a lot
it's
harder to do.
Then it's like, oh, you have Mixpanel, you have Google Analytics, you have 3 different ad networks, you have a Redshift, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, then you have to really start thinking through like, okay, what data comes from where, and how do we kind of rewire everything while the train's moving? Don't do that. Do it up front. Make your life easy.
And I think it is also a thing of, if you obviously laying the foundations is really important, but then as you do start to scale, that you are continually, I think that's sometimes the problem as well. Companies, they lay the foundations properly, but then as they start to scale, they lose discipline a bit with kind of connecting things, and I think that can also become a bit of a bottleneck as well, further down the line.
And that's what, when you start to get to that point, I think that's when you also look at, do you need a dedicated, a MOPS hire? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, it's something that I kind of like, a question that I like asking is a bit of a rapid question that there's never one answer to this, right? There's never a single answer. And to some extent, if there was one answer, it wouldn't make sense. But if there was one metric from your perspective that is just vital for you to be tracking as a marketer, right? Someone who's looking across the entire funnel, what would be that one metric? And I know you've got a bit of a different answer for this.
Yeah. I got a soapbox to step on. I'm going to go on a diatribe. I'm going in the weeds. No. So it's not MQLs. I'll tell you that one. It's not MQLs. So let me, I have like a very kind of aggressive opinion about attribution. So let me kind of like get that out of the way, and then I'll tell you what I think you should be watching. So the very first thing I would say, and it's kind of like the counter opinion to the question, I think, is number one mistake that you should avoid. Do not let attribution define your entire marketing strategy.
So true.
Let me repeat. Do not let attribution define your marketing strategy. Because what happens, especially with early stage companies, right, is you have a founding team who doesn't have a background in marketing. They don't understand it. They don't have the context. So like what ends up happening is everything you do is like, okay, well, how will that drive revenue? Right?
Yeah.
And the reality is like, if you're trying to use a data-driven way to do that, like attribution models are so inherently flawed that like what ends up happening is it gives you a misleading, if you're using it to define your entire playbook, it's giving you a misleading picture about what to invest in and why. So if you're in an org where everything marketing does requires like a revenue justification, or like an ROI model, like run, don't walk to the nearest exit. Because with marketing, there are inevitably things that you need to do as a marketer that you're never going to be able to explain. Like as an example, right? Like we're a B2B company that sells to the Fortune 100. Our website is not transactional, right? So, but at the same time, we need to make sure that our website reflects what our salespeople are pitching. So what's the ROI on doing a website redesign for us? I can't tell you it's going to be a 3 to 5% lift in, like, who knows? Like, I have no idea. Anyone who tells you the answer is probably lying to you. But the point is that there's a lot of things marketing needs to do, especially on the brand side, right? Which are either hard to measure or impossible to measure.
It doesn't directly contribute to the bottom line. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think for a lot of early stage company, there's an over reliance on attribution to drive the marketing playbook, and I think that's a fundamental mistake. So like, maybe that's not a key metric you should track. It's a key metric you shouldn't track. Well, you should track it, but realize it's a compass, not a GPS, you know? But if I had to pick one metric to look at, I would say it's ICP. So ideal customer profile.
Yeah.
And really measuring that across the different stages of the life cycle, right? So I think a lot of people look at kind of ideal customer profile or customer fit, right? When someone becomes a lead. My advice would be you need to start looking earlier than that. You need to be looking at whether the content that you are creating or
fits that ICP.
Yeah, exactly. And there's tools that allow you to do that, right? Like Clearbit is one, Clearbit Reveal. So it basically de-anonymizes your internet or the visitors to your website. So you can actually see, okay, what companies are engaging with my content, because like you could have a conversion problem. You could be engaging with like the right, your content's engaging with the right companies, but for whatever reason, they're not, like the next step down the line, like they're not
make sense to them. Yeah.
But like first look at ICP and look at ICP further up the funnel. That would be my advice.
Interesting. And just keeping it consistent across the entire funnel, because that's the, from marketing to sales, right?
Exactly. I think marketing tends to get too focused on the middle of the funnel without thinking about awareness and activation. And I think that's an area where, well, how do you measure the ROI of that, right? If it's not netting a lead, well, the way you measure ROI is your content engaging with the profile of companies that you want to be selling to. And I think that's an important thing that most marketers miss.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies, particularly in the kind of awareness stage, they really are, they're good at creating content, right? They're really good at creating content, but the point that they're always missing is creating the content to actually fit what that ICP wants to hear, or what they're actually going for. So I think it's like you said, it's really being reactive to who is actually engaging with the content. What are the companies, who are they? Because a lot of the time people are, like you said, they're very good at creating content, but they're not good at creating content for that ICP, or they get misguided and they go off piece. And
totally,
I think that is the biggest problem a lot of the time.
Or there's a mismatch between who you really sell to and who you think you sell to.
Yeah, that
happens all the time. Like marketing has like the persona slide in their slide deck, right? It's like, oh, we sell to Bob the builder and Cindy the CPA or whatever. And the reality is like that could be wildly different, dependent. Like the personas in your head and in your slide decks and in your marketing meetings or your board meetings are wildly different than who you actually sell to.
Of course. Yeah, I think it's, again, in them very early stages, it is just a case of putting out content. Okay, assessing. Okay, who is actually looking at this content? Who are the people? If you're noticing that 8 out of 10 people, they're all VPs of marketing, then you probably want to make it more specific to VPs of marketing, right? And it's then catering the strategy around that. So that makes perfect sense. Well, look, Matt, it's been really, really awesome having you on the show. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a deep conversation toward of LinkedIn and MarTech. So it's been a really, really interesting conversation. I hope you've enjoyed coming on.
Definitely. I'm a marketer, so I love talking about it. So, really enjoyed being on.
Likewise. Well, guys, I will see you on the next episode of the CDP Growth Show. See ya.